Thank you so much, Professor Krugell, for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.
So let's start this way. How desirous or otherwise is this VAT increase or hike being proposed by the Finance Minister?
So in the second round of the budget, he was able to make a proposal that it's only a 0.5 percentage point this year and another half next year. So it's not a big increase in VAT. But I think the objection is that because VAT has a regressive structure, the poor end up paying a bigger share of their income in this new tax to pay for new spending. And I think the big issue is, can't we save this money by cutting other spending or maybe increase other taxes, but not end up taxing the poor disproportionately?
And we see that, this 1% VAT increase from 15% to 16% probably might not hurt anyone or business if it's spread over 2 years compared to how it can provide a bit of cushioning on expenditure. But then I'd like to get your perspective on this.
I think you're right. The impact is likely to be small. So of the additional 28 billion rand that government hopes to collect, the VAT is a very small part of that. A much bigger share comes from bracket creep, where personal income taxpayers will be paying a lot more simply because he hasn't adjusted the brackets for inflation. So in a way, he's taking money from specific groups in society, taxpayers, and giving it to government employees who are now going to be safer in their jobs and receive a wage increase. And he's also paying some grants. So from a spending perspective, the minister is really just transferring spending from one group to another. The macro impacts on growth, on inflation, etc., are projected to be rather small.
And looking at the impact of this and the proposed VAT increase, there is to be a sticking point now between coalition parties. Would there ever be an headway to this?
I think the sticking point is that the VAT increase gives some leverage to parties that are part of the government of national unity, but want to have their voices heard in a way that the ANC hasn't allowed yet. And so it's not only about the increase in VAT and the impact on the poor, it's also about taking in a strong position and making your voice heard within the government of national unity. And the Democratic Alliance have different, I think, what should we call them, claims that they would like to see honored, things that they want to see changed, and they're using the budget as some leverage over the ANC.
All right, so now if VAT hikes are not accepted, are there alternatives? How realistic can those alternatives be in the midst of pressuring economic headwinds?
I think the alternatives are not going to be other tax alternatives. The minister's already taken the easy route of allowing a fair bit of bracket creep, and he's increased excise duties. The only thing really left is the fuel levy, but he said that the fuel levy will remain unchanged in order to support the poor. So that being said, the alternative is to cut spending, but that's quite difficult. You can do across the board lawnmower style cut, where you just cut a little bit everywhere, or you have to target a very specific department program and say the rollout of funding for early childhood development centers and the fact that grade R is now becoming compulsory in primary schools. We'll just postpone that plan for a year or two and save that money and use it for the other new spending. It could go, I think, either the across-the-board lawnmower or then very targeted, of which I think the very targeted is actually more sensible.
Okay, so away from taxes, as of March 2025, South Africa's national debt was projected to be approximately about 75.5% of its GDP. So would you still consider more borrowings, perhaps, to actually offset the deficit?
I think the minister is really trying to consolidate that deficit and get to that turning point in the debt to GDP ratio. In a way, I think more austerity in terms of spending is going to be difficult to achieve unless you have a large-scale review of spending and do some really sensible cuts on that side. New taxes are unlikely, simply because there's no time left in the current budget. What I think economists are most concerned about is the growth projection that he has in the budget, which is rather high. So he's talking about 1.9% growth for this year. And that could be a way to inflate the tax take numbers and to reduce that budget deficit to GDP or debt to GDP number. But if the growth isn't realized throughout the year, we could end up with worse ratios, and that would not be good from a ratings agency's point of view.
You're saying that austerity measures might be hard to execute, but I mean, Ghana proposed cost-cutting measures to free up fiscal space, and even the Democratic Alliance is suggesting selling port concessions and pruning down excess spendings instead of increasing taxes. So doesn't that make sense to you?
Oh, it does, and I think there are the technical aspects of that. The committee's working through the budget really on a line-by-line basis, trying to figure out where they can cut. But there's also some contestation over those ideas like more private access to railways or more private access to ports. There are factions within the ANC who are not keen on that, and they would rather do other things like increase the VAT rate than to allow the private sector a bigger role in the economy. So the reform process that we talk about is really contested.
So what about cutting the bloated cabinet, as some politicians have actually suggested? Do you think it can provide some sort of meaningful budget relief?
Yes, the cabinet is huge, and if you add the deputy ministers, there's really some room to cut there. I'm not quite sure how much of the money they'll be able to make up in that way, but it could be a very useful signal to tell taxpayers the government is serious about reprioritizing spending and cutting unnecessary and wasteful spending, because I think a lot of the pushback we're seeing from the public in terms of this increase in the VAT rate is really something of a tax revolt. It's people feeling you can't pour more water into a leaking bucket, and giving more money to government is really not sensible. At the same time, when they have all these deputy ministers running around on full pay and doing things that we're not quite sure what they are.
So talking about these tax reforms now, the EFF, though we understand that it is not part of the coalition government, is actually proposing increased taxation of the wealthy as an alternative. So, I mean, can that actually generate probably additional revenue to cover the 60 billion rand deficit?
I think that's quite tricky, and it's easy to talk about the idea of a wealth tax, but they haven't really put any modeling on the table or put numbers to these proposals. And I think in the cases where that has been done, it shows that it's difficult to measure wealth. It's difficult to tax it well, and these really high net worth individuals are internationally mobile, and they are well resourced when it comes to avoiding taxes. So in the end, you could put up a really complicated system and not get a lot of revenue from it. And I think that goes to the international experience as well. In that sense, if you do want to tax the rich, a more effective way would simply be to increase current personal income tax rates even further. But South Africa's personal income tax rates are already on the high side internationally. And I think the disincentive effects and the impact that could have on business and investor sentiments are really significant. In the budget presentation that accompanies the speech, the minister also went to some lengths to explain that personal income tax rates and corporate tax rates are high, and the base is quite narrow, and he doesn't want to mess with those.
I don't think that if tax reforms in the country would include digitization of the system, it will help curb situations around evasion and computation of what can be taxed, most especially as it involves the wealthy.
Absolutely, and that's also why SARS has been given additional funding to really implement the latest systems in terms of computer systems, using machine learning models and AI models to look for outliers in their data and to find those tax evaders. They have quite a significant debt book of taxpayers that they know should be paying tax but have been avoiding it, and they've now been given additional resources to pursue them to get that money. So I think that's going to be a really sensible return on investment from the minister's point of view.
All right, so let's quickly look at the extremes of this. What are the possible economic consequences if the VAT hike is scrapped without alternative revenue sources?
I think the macro impact is relatively small simply because the hike is relatively small. I do think in the process we've managed to create more policy uncertainty. And some positive commentators say, well, but I think it's the sort of process that makes investors think that there's benefit in waiting a bit, just to see how things play out before you start pursuing big projects that take a long time to generate income. Let's wait and see how the GNU plays out, see how the budget plays out, and that is a significant cost for our longer term growth prospects. It's scaring off domestic and international investors.
And we're also able to find out that, as of March 12, 2025, the rand weakened, trading at 18.26 against the US dollar, down by about 0.3% from the previous close. So according to what we understand, is as a result of the VAT hike standoff between, of course, the Minister of Finance, the coalition government and all. But then, are we going to see a continuous fall if a concrete agreement is not reached in time?
I think at the moment the rand did weaken this week initially, but it's been gaining some value back again in the last day or so. So I think the markets have been relatively calm about what's happening, and we are probably keeping a closer eye on US CPI data and their unemployment data and the way that the Fed is heading than we are at these political developments. So for this parliamentary process, it's early days, so they have a couple of weeks to take us through the committees and see what they can agree upon. I'm relatively sure that they're going to come to some sort of settlement, but the exact shape of that is going to be interesting to observe.
Professor Krugell, do you think that the failure to pass these crucial bill or these budgets, as it involves these tax reforms and VAT hikes, might probably lead to a breakdown between the parties in the government coalition?
There is that possibility. The DA is really using the budget as leverage now to step up their role in the GNU and get more of the reforms going that they are prioritizing. So the extent to which there will be concessions in order to keep them in the GNU, I think is going to be interesting. If they back down without gaining something from this, I think, again, we can sensibly question whether it's useful to be part of the GNU if you're basically not heard at all in those processes.
So then, if we are to be critical about this, now let's still look at the tax reforms and the economic reforms of Cyril Ramaphosa. What do you think moving forward should be in terms of what should be contained in that particular reform bill that can help South Africa steer clear of issues that affect budget funding and performance?
There are many good plans already on the table, and the minister also mentioned some of them in the budget speech. Involving the private sector in electricity transmission is one of the big ones. We already have a good supply of independent electricity producers, but they are struggling to get connected to the network and to operate in a functional electricity market. So those reforms are important. The reforms in transport and logistics and at Transnet, again, is key, and the minister specifically said that he's not giving Transnet any more money. Only if they engage with the private sector on a bigger scale and more proactively will he consider further guarantees of debt. So he's really putting the pressure on them. And I think those are the two key spots that could make a big difference to economic growth. And once you have growth, all your other problems become much smaller. You get closer to your tax projections, and those ratios like deficit to GDP and debt to GDP end up looking a lot better once you have the economy growing at 1.5% or more per year.
Now, you mentioned the transport sector, Professor Krugell. Do you think it is attractive enough for investors? I mean, we've seen a lot of bailouts from governments to reviving and steadying the ship of Eskom and Transnet, but it has not really resulted into anything significant in terms of either financial or operational growth.
I think we should separate Eskom and Transnet in that they are facing different challenges. But the Transnet case specifically, I think there are easy wins in concessioning some of the ports, in concessioning specific railway lines, and these proposals are on the table. But again, they are contested. Not everybody's convinced of this, and there's been really slow progress that we would like to see much more momentum behind. So if the budget and its postponement and now the process in Parliament can serve as a trigger to speed up some of those other reforms, that would be particularly useful. Maybe just focusing the minds of other ministers, other than Minister of Finance, on what needs to get done to get the economy growing.
And even as South Africa is battling domestic issues, there's still the U.S. tariff conundrum also affecting South African economy. Do you think that will play a major part in whatever revenue ambitions that Cyril Ramaphosa might have?
Yes, a lot of the revenues that the Minister of Finance is bargaining on has to do with exporting sectors doing well, and if we're talking a world where there's no more AGOA agreement, or South Africa is out of the AGOA agreement, or even worse case, we get to the point where the US starts levying reciprocal tariffs on its trading partners. That will have a big impact on our exporting sectors and on revenue in the budget. So those uncertainties loom large, and I think they'll also influence the deliberations of the Monetary Policy Committee at their meeting next week.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Waldo Krugell, economist at Northwest University. I know that's a lot that Cyril Ramaphosa's unity government, the government of coalition, will need to do in order to scale this hurdle, most especially as it involves the VAT hikes. He has actually said that it is coming to stay, but then how he's going to bring all the parties along to parley with him, that's going to be a big challenge. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us.